question. Hello, Mr. Kim. I live in Thailand, which is a Buddhist society. For normal people, Buddhism is just rituals and worshipping an idol religion. For religious people, they focus and see only the Buddha as an ultimate being, no concept of God, creation, or ascended masters. I see this make them unaware that they are spiritual beings and can go beyond dead words. Did Gautama Buddha teach about the Creator 2,500 years ago, or did he give dictations about this? So the short answer, but I want to actually go beyond the question a little bit, but the short answer is that 2,500 years ago, the Buddha didn't teach about a creator. And there's a good reason why, and that ties into what I actually feel inspired to talk about based on this question, which is what we could call the secret behind all religions. And we see it in Buddhism, we see it in Christianity, even other religions as well. And it is that, let's look at the Buddha's life, right? He grew up in a Hindu culture and society, where the Hindu religion was dominant. And he didn't become a Hindu Brahmin because he wanted something beyond what the Hindu religion of his time offered. And what you saw at that time was that they had this caste of Brahmins that were engaged in all these intellectual discussions. For example, they were discussing whether there was a creator, what God was like, was the universe eternal or was it temporary, did it have a beginning, was it infinite or did it have a finite size? All of these discussions that they debated from a very intellectual vantage point. But the Buddha, as the story goes, he grew up in a castle, didn't see people who were old or deceased, so he thought he was going to live forever, and then one day he sees an old man, realizes everything he's been told was not correct, and he goes out in the forest and lives as an ascetic for 6 years, where he is just meditating and almost starving himself to death. And then he has a breakthrough, an epiphany, and realizes that there's a middle way between a worldly life and an ascetic lifestyle. And this is what becomes the basis for his teaching. But you see, the Buddha, it was not intellectual reasoning that brought him to this breakthrough. It was not that he sat there in his mind while he was sitting under a tree meditating, intellectually going over arguments as the Brahmins did. For him it was experiential. He literally had an inner experience. And it's generally, by most religious people, they don't understand what this means. And it was what we can call a mystical experience, an intuitive experience, but it was really more than that, because what the Buddha experienced was that there is a reality beyond what the human mind, the outer mind, the intellectual, linear, analytical mind can grasp and deal with. So here we have all the Brahmins. They are thinking that in their minds, logical, rational, linear, analytical minds, they can know the ultimate truth. They can define it. And they would often refer to the Vedic scriptures. But of course, one person would refer to one scripture and another person would refer to another, and they would have different interpretations. So the Brahmins were divided into all of these different groups that each preached their version of this is the only true way to interpret the scriptures, and this is the way the world is. But this was all in the mind, in the human mind. And what the Buddha experienced is that there's a reality beyond the human mind, and that we can connect to it directly and experience it. And this is what became the foundation for the Buddha's teachings, which you really could say everything is the Buddha nature. This was the foundation for the Buddha's teachings. Everything is already the Buddha nature. It is created out of the Buddha nature. we have become separated in our minds. We are not separated in reality, but in our minds we have created this separate sense of identity where we don't see that we came from the Buddha nature and we are one with the Buddha nature. We are not connected to the Buddha nature. We have created our own worldview in a state of separation from the Buddha nature. And this is what is called Maya, illusion, the veil of Maya. Because our minds have become trapped behind this veil where we don't see that everything is the Buddha nature. We don't experience that everything is the Buddha nature. And that's why the Brahmins had all of these theories and interpretations. And so what the Buddha said 2,500 years ago, he said, let's not focus on all of these big questions. Let's focus on one thing, teaching people the Eightfold Path, which if they follow it, at least some will connect to the Buddha nature in themselves. And when you connect to the Buddha nature, you can get answers to these questions that do not come from the linear, analytical, reasoning mind. You see what I'm trying to say? Most people, even today, whether it's Buddhists or Hindus or Christians, Muslims, they take what we call the outer approach to religion. They refer to the scriptures that they think is the ultimate authority, like the Word of God or whatever. And then they think that it's possible with the outer mind to understand this in this linear intellectual way. And most religions follow this pattern. There was an original founder who had an experience. His approach was experiential. He gave certain teachings, but the purpose of these teachings was really to help people have the same experience as the founder. But after the religion started growing, there emerged this priest class, and they now were interpreting the founder's words and teachings from the outer mind. So the secret behind all religions is that there is a reality that is not affected by the human mind, but that most people are trapped in this veil of illusion, and the veil is created by the human mind. It's created by reasoning, interpreting. And the only way beyond it is to connect to the reality that's beyond the mind, that isn't created by the mind. This is what the Buddha taught 2,500 years ago, in its essence. This is also what Jesus taught 2,000 years ago. He didn't call it the Buddha nature, he called it the Christ mind, or we can also call it the one mind, if we want to be completely neutral. I've explained this in several videos, including my video about how the world was created, how everything was created out of this one mind, because the purpose of creation is our growth in consciousness. And we grow by being in a certain environment, interacting with that environment, using our co-creative abilities, imagination, free will, and we are creating a concept in our minds, projecting it upon the base energy, and when we see how this turns out, we can refine our state of mind, we can raise our state of mind. So, but the danger of this is that we can become trapped in what we create in our own minds and think that what we have created is reality. And that's when we go into this veil of Maya, are trapped in separation. And the way to get back from that separation is to reconnect to the one mind that we came out of, whether you call it the Buddha nature or the Christ mind or the one mind. So this is the essence of all religion. This is the overlooked secret that most religions have lost. And so the irony here in terms of Buddhism is that most Buddhists claim to be following the Buddha, but they're actually rejecting the Buddha in his present form, because they're referring to the scriptures, what was said 2,500 years ago. It's like they have taken a freeze frame of the Buddha and said, based on the scriptures that were said back then, based on our interpretations of it, this is what the Buddha taught. But you see, the Buddha didn't mean for his teaching to become static, because that's what he saw in the Hindu religion. The scriptures of the Hindu religion, the Vedas, have become static. They were frozen in time. And now the Brahmins were intellectually interpreting and reinterpreting them. That's what he didn't want for Buddhism. What did the Buddha then want? He wanted to create a religion where the goal of the people following that, I should not really say that the Buddha wanted to create a religion, because he wanted to give people a process where the goal of the process was to connect to the Buddha nature in yourself and to the being of the Buddha who gave the teaching. The same with Jesus. What did Jesus want? He wanted to give people a process whereby they could connect to the Christ mind and to Jesus as a spiritual being. See, the whole idea of Buddhism is the Buddha reached a higher state of consciousness. He demonstrated in his life a path to a higher state of consciousness that we can all reach by following the path that he outlined. And then by following this path, the Buddha reached a point where he could go into nirvana, as they say, which you could also say with today's wording, he ascended. He became an ascended master. And ever since that happened 2,500 years ago, Gautama Buddha has been an ascended master who has been associated with earth, working with earth. And the goal of his teaching was that the people who followed the Eightfold Path would, by discovering the Buddha nature in themselves, would connect to the mind and the being of the Buddha, the ascended master Gautama Buddha. And the importance of this is that if you want to understand any religion, you have to understand it in the context in which it appeared. Look at what people knew, or rather didn't know, 2,500 years ago. They didn't know as much about the universe as we know today, but they also didn't know as much about human psychology as we know today. So obviously, it is the intent behind giving a spiritual teaching that if people apply the teaching, they are raising their consciousness individually, and this helps raise the collective consciousness as a whole. And Buddhism has played an important part in raising the collective consciousness. But it hasn't played as big of a part as it could have if it had remained a more living religion. Christianity has played a part in raising the collective consciousness, but Christianity has been even more misinterpreted than Buddhism. Christianity has misinterpreted Jesus' teachings more than Buddhism has done with the Buddha's teachings. And so again it hasn't had, but still there has been a raising of the collective consciousness. And what does that mean? It means that the Buddha can now give a more advanced teaching today than he could give 2,500 years ago. This is not a limitation of the Buddha. This is a limitation of the collective consciousness. The same with Jesus, who can give a more advanced teaching. That's why it is important to have the concept that these original figures, Jesus and the Buddha, are now ascended masters, and as such they are willing to help anyone, first of all, connect to their beings, connect to the Christ mind or the Buddha nature, but also receive insights, direct revelation and teachings from them. And this is what the masters call progressive revelation. They can give a progressively more advanced teaching as the collective consciousness is being raised. And that's what's lost in these religions. And the Buddha has given teachings since then as an ascended master. And I have, as I've explained in several videos, been working with the ascended masters since 2002 and taken a number of these dictations. And I've actually taken quite a number of dictations from the Buddha, which are you can read in a book called Modern Mind, Modern Buddha. Modern Mind, Modern Buddha. It's an ebook. And you can also find these dictations on the website Ascended Master Light. Excuse me. And so the question simply is, what are people ready for? And I'm not saying that everybody should be ready for this progressive revelation. But some people are definitely ready for more, and you see that all over the world, that more people are not satisfied with the outer religion that tells them to believe in doctrines or practice rituals. And so if you feel that any of this resonates with you, then you need to contemplate, what does it mean for you? What are you open to? And then you need to seek these materials, try them out, see what they do for you. Does it resonate with you intuitively? Do you feel that there's something there? Does it help you, first of all, realize the Buddha nature in yourself? And does it help you connect to the being of the Buddha, of Jesus, or whomever is the spiritual being that you see as important? And in terms of the question again, has the Buddha taught about did the Buddha teach about the Creator 2,500 years ago? As I said, no, he didn't, because he said, let's first help people connect to the Buddha nature, then it'll be easier to answer these questions. Because many of these questions that are asked are actually, they're asked from the linear mind, and they can't really be answered by the linear mind. Let's take a question that was debated by the Hindu Brahmins. Is the universe infinite or is it finite? Well, it very much depends on not only the words you're using, but how do you conceptualize something infinite? I mean, can you, with the linear analytical mind, even deal with the concept of something infinite? A concept is by definition something that has form. But something that's infinite can't really have form, right? So how do you even deal with that concept intellectually? But intuitively, you can experience something. But the problem is that when you have one of these mystical experiences, you can't put words on it afterwards. You can't communicate it to people. And this is part of what the Buddha realized and Jesus realized. There are certain things that cannot be put into words, that cannot be communicated through words. They can only be experienced. When you have the experience, it's not that the question is answered, because it doesn't have an answer, a linear answer. But the question fades away, becomes obsolete. Because compared to the experience, you see how limited the question was. And I know much more could be said about this, but I think if you can grasp these things, that beyond any outer religion, any teaching, any doctrine, there is the direct experience. And this is what the founder of Buddhism and Christianity, Buddha and Jesus, this is what they wanted you to have, that experience. And when you have that experience, it becomes a foundation for raising your awareness. And as you raise your awareness, you can have a progressively higher understanding, but also a higher experience. And suddenly you will have a different way to look at life, a different way to look at these deeper questions of life. It will just shift. It's a shift in awareness. It's like you have lived your whole life in a cave, and suddenly you find the exit, and you walk outside, and there's a whole world that opens up for you. That's what it is when you connect to this, the Buddha nature, the Christ mind, the one mind in yourself.